Ever since I was a child, I've always been fascinated by fairy tales, folk tales, and stories involving fantasy or mythical creatures, though the main ones that I learned about came from Europe and were popularized by Disney movies. I also came to enjoy the concept of fractured fairy tales, which were more unique twists on these types of tales, especially since you never expect them to end the way they usually did, given how mainstream and commonplace or common knowledge most of the fairy tales that we know end up being. As a result, those fairy tales, along with the many references that were shown in movies, books, TV shows, video games, comics, and even anime or manga, stuck with me for years. Though a part of me wanted to create a fairy tale theme or fantasy story for a long time, and I mean a very long time. It wasn't until I reached university and actually took a course on fairy tales and fantasy did my inspiration to write about fairy tales become more prominent, per se. It also helped that even as a kid, I liked reading and even telling fairy tale stories, along with putting my own spin on them from time to time, just to make these more interesting. And this is before I learned about the concept of fractured fairy tales. I was really young by the time started telling stories. As a result, I decided to come up with ideas for my fairy tale traveler story, along with the many spin-offs, sequels that I have planned for the future. And trust me, there's a lot of stories I have yet to tell, with some being more complex than the other. The fairy tales that I do plan on featuring, or at least focusing on, that will cross over are common or famous ones like Jack and the Beanstalk, Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Cinderella, Rumpelstiltskin, Beauty and the Beast, Rapunzel, and Hansel and Gretel. Though I also want to focus on more obscure ones, such as the Snow Queen, the Six Swans, Snow White and Rose Red, the Girl Without Hands, and etc. I figured why not have them all come together, but in a way that is both unique and slightly more realistic, due to how some fairy tales tend to have rather skewed morals and Aesops at the end. Or at least, sure, at the time it would have been more acceptable, but now it's kind of questionable, especially with some of the themes that don't exactly translate well in the modern day. But at the same time, my fairy tales will not only be fractured, but they also kind of deconstruct some of the concepts that would have been acceptable but not seen as acceptable, or even you could say it hasn't aged well because of it. I mean, other forms of media have done stuff like this, such as Ruby, Fables, Once Upon a Time, and even the fixed fairy tales from the Haishi series. So why not put my own spin on these stories while I'm at it? Hope you look forward to it, at least.